Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Korg MS-20-V tutorial series. Continuing our look at the patch panel today, I'm going to concentrate mostly on the envelopes. If you're enjoying this series and you want to help support my channel, check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Okay, without further ado, let's make a start on Envelope Generator 1. Just to remind ourselves that Envelope Generator 1 has nothing to do with our standard volume envelope. Here's my standard sound. Crank some attack time in, makes no difference whatsoever. Attack time is taken care of by Envelope Generator 2. We've already seen that. We've also seen that if I increase the pitch modulation control, here's my normal EG1 connection. I give myself some of that. There's my Envelope Generator 1 attack time now having an effect on the pitch modulation. If we want to override that behaviour, we use the two patch points to the left of the Envelope Generator 1. We'll deal with out first, and you could be forgiven for thinking that if I take a connection from the output of Envelope Generator 1 and plug it into the frequency input, there won't be any difference, but there will be. It's now going to be a higher pitch. That's because the normal behaviour goes from -5 to 0, -5 being a nominal kind of voltage concept. One of these difficulties when you're emulating analog synthesizers, we're still talking about voltages, but there's no such thing in the digital world. It's all been replicated. But we're basically going from -5 or -n up to 0. When I override this behavior, can you see this little legend? It says +5 to 0. So we've now got a different operating range. We've gone from there, here's our middle, gone from -5 to 0 up to 0 to +5. And having explained that, it should be pretty obvious what the reverse out does, because this also says +5, 0, but can you see that the shape is different? So now we're going to get an inverted envelope. So if I hold this key down for long enough, there we settle on what's the basic note, the basic default C that would be that you would hear if there was no envelope operating. So the reverse is taking us from plus something back down to where we started in the first place. If I crank some release time in on Envelope Generator 2 so that we can hear the release time of Envelope Generator 1, without Envelope Generator 2, there's no such thing as any release. The moment I let the key go, the sound stops. So I need Envelope Generator 2 to give me that tail, which means that now when I let the key go, the note's going to come back up again. Let's hear that with the standard way around. There we are going up, let the key go, there we come back down again. So those are our Envelope Generator 1 overridden patch panel connections. Exactly the same concept for Envelope Generator 2 will jump across here before we look at the more complicated stuff. So I'm going to plug a patch cable in here into the frequency socket. I need to in order to override Envelope Generator 1's standard behaviour. I don't want to hear Envelope Generator 1 having an effect on the pitch anymore. I'm trying to override it, so I need to plug this cable in. And now Envelope Generator 2's envelope is going to take care of the pitch modulation. There's a little bit of slightly strange behaviour here. I'm going to turn the sustain level up to 10. I'm going to give myself slightly longer attack and decay. Just listen very carefully to what's going on. Did you hear how there was a decay? Well, there shouldn't have been a decay, should there? Because the sustain level was at 1. When I did the original episode on the envelopes, I didn't realise that this was the behaviour of the classic envelope generator. Its attack peak is slightly higher than its maximum sustain level. If I switch to modern mode, that's not the case. Goes up to the top, stays at the top, doesn't go anywhere else. That's not the case in classic mode. We've got this little bump. Comes slightly over the top and back down again. So just bear that in mind. It's just a feature of the classic envelope generator. What we're really interested in is figuring out how the patch panel works. So Envelope Generator 2 is now pulling double duty. In addition to controlling the amplifier, we press the key, it gets louder, we let the key go, it fades away. It's doing exactly the same thing to the pitch. It's modulating the pitch in the same way that it's modulating volume. So if we have a look on the oscilloscope, as the wave gets bigger, you're going to see the pitch going up at the same speed, the same time. And then when I let the key go, the pitch is dropping at the same time that the volume is falling away. Throw that one away and we'll go to reverse. And this time you can see a slightly different legend. We've just got 0 volts. Let's have a listen to what it sounds like. So we're aiming for C, about 130 Hertz. So ignoring that little dip, we started high, started at +5, came down to 0. When I let the key go, we sprang back up to our +5, which is our actual kind of starting point. So each of the envelopes has slightly different behaviour. Bear in mind these legends that will kind of help you to understand whether they're pluses or minuses. Don't forget, envelopes operate in a monopolar manner. They either go from +0 up or +0 down, but they don't straddle both sides of that axis. Now let's have a look at this control input patch point. Well, this doesn't do anything until we plug something into this connection underneath. We have an internal patch panel VCA, or voltage controlled amplifier. This isn't the master amplifier for the synthesizer. It's an internal amplifier for use within the patch panel. And what it gives us is a very simple non-modulating control voltage source. Now the best way that I can think of to demonstrate the VCA is to use the modulation wheel. This is my modulation wheel patch point. And just a very quick note before we do anything else. The modulation wheel is normaled to pitch vibrato. If I turn my modulation wheel up without doing anything else to the synth at all, I've got vibrato. That's not visible anywhere on the front panel, so just bear in mind that there is that invisible normal connection. I'm going to override it by taking an output from the modulation wheel patch point, plugging it into the input of this internal VCA, and coming out of the VCA output into frequency modulation. So I've just overridden this control down here. If I crank that up now, I've got pitch modulation control from my modulation wheel. You can see it in the bottom left hand corner. So here's my standard C with no modulation wheel on. So that's an example of me basically using the VCA, the internal patch panel VCA, as a routing mechanism. I didn't have to do that. I could have just plugged the modulation wheel directly into frequency and it would have done exactly the same job. I'm proving that this is a simple linear route basically. But the reason I've gone about it this way is so that I can demonstrate the control input. This control input has a normal connection coming out of envelope generator 1. In other words, it's influencing this connection, this otherwise hardwired connection between the modulation wheel and pitch modulation. If I crank the modulation wheel up to maximum, that increase in pitch is happening from envelope generator 1. If I make the attack time 0, it's instant. There's the attack being introduced. So envelope generator 1 is providing a normal control input into this connection, which we can then override. So let's take an output, for instance, from the modulation generator's square wave and slow it down so that we can hear what's going on. So the modulation generator is providing a control input into this little internal VCA. The VCA is taking a control voltage signal from the modulation wheel. So when the modulation wheel is turned all the way up, it's taking the maximum control voltage. If you're getting confused with control voltages, the way that I like to try to kind of simplify everything is to think about ranges from 0 to 1 or 0 to -1. So at the moment, the modulation wheel has a range of 0, which is off, up to 1, which is the maximum. That's a constant signal. If my modulation wheel's turned all the way up, the input to this now hidden VCA is 1. But then the modulation generator is acting as a modulator. It's changing the control voltage that's coming out of this output socket. When the square wave is on, it's saying do your thing to the maximum possible extent, and when the square wave is off, it's saying do your thing to the minimum possible extent. And we're hearing all of that manifested as two different pitch changes. The reason I've kind of routed this seemingly convoluted solution is because my modulation wheel now does something really unusual. I'll hold the note down, turn the volume down a little bit, and I'll bring my modulation wheel down. So what you're hearing there is as the modulation wheel comes down, I'm sending a smaller and smaller control voltage signal into the amplifier. That's the maximum amount of thing that can ever escape. The modulation generator is then determining whether or not all of that reduced signal or none of that reduced signal is output. If you're not very familiar with modular systems, it can be really easy to get overwhelmed by what's going on. And what I generally tend to find is strip something down to the absolute bare minimum possible so that you can understand one route. And then when you've got one route figured, you can start changing or modulating that route, normally via control sources, control inputs, and see how changes to that thing can be applied. And it is possible to very easily, get very complicated very quickly. But fundamentally, the processes are really, really simple. We've got control voltages flowing through this patch panel, and we can modulate the amount of those control voltages that are flowing through, and that's going to have an effect on some other part of the system somewhere. One final patch point to talk about today as far as the envelope generators are concerned, and it's EG1 trig in, and it's a little bit tricky, this one. Basically what's happening is that envelopes have basically two different triggers. Ordinarily, when you press a key, that's your attack signal. When you let the key go, that's your release trigger. I should use the word trigger all the time. Well, we can hook into that behavior with this connection over here. What I'm going to do is take a connection from the modulation generator's square wave. It's really simple dealing with ons and offs. And I'm going to plug that into EG1 trig in. It's going to take a little bit of configuration of my default preset to get this working. The first thing that I'm going to do is turn the frequency down really slow. So it's operating about every 6 or 7 seconds. So I've now got this really, really slow cycling wave into which I can fit an envelope and clearly hear what's going on. Now I'm going to crank my attack and release times of envelope generator 1 up to about 2 seconds each. Finally, I'm going to introduce pitch modulation from my good old friend down here. So watch the light on the modulation generator and track what's going on with the envelope generator. When the light goes out, the attack phase is triggering. When the light comes on, it's the release phase. So it's really unusual. This modulation generator, the light, it goes out when the attack fires and it comes on when the release fires. If I make the attack time of envelope generator 1 faster, there's my nice fast attack, there's my slow release. So by connecting into EG trigger 1, I'm overriding the standard triggered behavior, which is basically coming from my keyboard, and I'm now taking a cyclic or periodic modulation amount from the modulation generator. So in order for you to be able to get any useful value out of this patch point, you need to be plugging in something that has triggers. There's no point, for instance, plugging in the modulation wheel into EG trigger 1. Let's see what that does. No envelope whatsoever. Of course, the standard behavior of this patch point is to take its triggers from the keyboard. So basically, this is our normal connection. This is going to sound exactly the same as it would have done previously. I've just got my attack and release times back to something healthy, given myself some release time on the envelope generator 2 amplitude. So here's my key down, and here's my key up. They're generating triggers. This EG1 trigger in is perfectly happy because it's getting what it needs. Okay, that'll do us for today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please hit the like button. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.